welcome to the sixth and final part in our Specter V2 build series. Right here in a plastic bag, because while I solder, I protect the motor so we don't pull random bits of metal into the magnets here. This is the motor we're going to go ahead and start to install in the helicopter. We're working on page 42 of the manual here. This particular motor is an Egodrift 4530 HS. Egodrift motors are generally either HS or HT. HS are typically more efficient, longer lasting, plenty of power still, but not, knockout, drag out power. That's the HT line of motors, or high torque. That's your, all out 3D machines are going to go great on the HT. So this is a 4530 HS, 510 kV on the stock pinion in the Spectre. This will give you a great range of head speeds in the, 1900 to 2200 or so probably range. I've actually got the 10-tooth pinion, which is an optional pinion from XL Power, because I like to run generally what would be considered lower head speeds for most folks. So I'll run the Spectre probably around the 1400 to 1800 range. The 10-tooth pinion will be great for that. But most folks are going to want to go with the 4530 HS, 510 kV, or a 510 kV motor, somewhere around that neighborhood. With the stock pinion will get you in average head speeds for most folks. Alright, so first thing we have to do, let's take a quick look at the manual here, is attach our motor mount to the motor, and then we're going to build it out the whole assembly from here. So we'll get that mount on, we'll get the pinion on, and then as you can see in the next page here, we'll get the lower bearing block. The motor shaft is supported on both ends here in the Spectre, and then there's a carbon fiber sort of cross-shaped piece that joins these two pieces together, and then we'll move this over into the main fuse and install it from there. So without further ado, let's just start assembling things here. Again, this is another one of those instances where the manual talks about using retaining compound on this bearing, but it's already done here. This bearing is not coming out of here, so no need to add any additional, unless you can somehow magically get the bearing out, add anything there. So let's go ahead and get going here. So we're going to take our motor mount and install it this way. Comme ça. And then we will take our 4 motor mount bolts, which are these big guys here, and a 3mm driver. We'll get some Loctite going. Now, whenever you're working with a motor, be really careful when you start to move screws and whatnot around, because it's really unfortunate if you drop a screw and it gets inside. With the powerful magnets in there, it can be a real pain in the butt to get them out of there. And if you don't, it will obviously wreak havoc. So just keeping these loose as always until I get all 4 bolts in. Then we'll send it home. Okay, now that we have all 4 bolts in, we'll go ahead and tighten these down. Nice and snug. These bolts are very beefy, so don't be afraid to put a little elbow grease into these. And there we go. We've got our motor mount onto the motor. You can see, by the way, I've gone ahead and soldered the motor billets. Egodrift motors come with motor billets that are, perfectly sized for the motor itself. So I've gone ahead and soldered these on here. Now, next step after that is to add the motor pinion, and for that we're going to use a little bit of green Loctite. And V1 owners will be very familiar with this. So the side of the pinion that has where the set screws will go is the side that goes closest to the motor, and where we'll actually be putting, getting my all over here, where we'll actually be putting that green Loctite is on this surface here, and we do it so that it stays in good contact with the bearing here. What happens is if this pinion spins, not in conjunction with the bearing, you get excessive wear on the pinion, and that can lead to vibrations and other things. So I'm just going to sort of give this a little test fit here, make sure it slides all the way into the bearing, so it should go all the way in like that, and that goes in without issue. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that back out. It's a snug fit. And I'm really just going to put just a little bit of green Loctite around the pinion. So I don't need a lot here. It's a very tight fit. So just that little drop I'm going to kind of spread around here. Just get a really thin layer of it around here. And then we're going to take this pinion and just push it in. And then we're going to go ahead and take our 2 set screws. We're going to take a quick look at our motor shaft. I'm actually going to pop this off one second. And then there's a flat spot in the motor shaft. And I want to make sure one of these pinions goes right onto that. So I'll just set this back just like that. And I know it's the one facing me. And I'm going to go ahead and run red Loctite on my pinion set screws. So I sort of give them a good soaking, and then I work most of that off on my finger. And then I've got this all aligned, so I'm going to be careful not to rotate anything, because it's really important this pinion screw hit that flat spot on the motor shaft. Just double checking it. We're aligned well. Yep. We're going to send it home. Push the pinion all the way down. Tighten your set screw. Come around to the other side and do the other one. This one's not going into a flat spot, but it's just insurance. Okay, there we go. There is our pinion attached to the motor shaft. So, next steps from here will be to add our lower bearing block for the motor. I'm going to check this bearing now. I'm just pushing firmly on it in both directions. It is not coming out of here, so it's clearly already got some retaining compound on it. Let's pay close attention to the direction here and make sure we face the right end up. Alright, so looking at the manual, this says this piece is pre-assembled, and in fact it is. I can't push the bearing in and out. And there's a diagram that shows you which way up this faces, but the XL Power logo here will face towards the motor, so that when the motor is in the orientation it's mounted in, that logo is facing up. So let's take a quick look at this. We're going to want, same thing here, a little bit of green Loctite around this top piece of the pinion. And so we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll just slide this bearing block on it. So that little drop, I'm going to work all the way around here. So we'll just take our time spreading that out. You can see just a tiny, tiny layer there. And then again, this is going to go, just slides onto the bearing, or onto the pinion rather, like that. And we're just going to let that kind of hang out like so. And then we're going to get our X-brace here, this piece, and then it looks like it's symmetrical here, so there's no up or down to it, nor is there any sort of chamfer on the hole, so there's no left or right way. And it's the M3 by 6mm screws will be going into here, which I'm guessing. Let's make sure we have the orientation of these blocks the same, and that we're getting the X-brace on the right side. If you look, I tilt it this way, you can see that there's really, and I'll move it through the light a few different ways, only one orientation where you get a flat spot where this X could sit, like so. Let's get a driver, get some Loctite going, just using blue here again. We got 4 bolts here, this isn't going anywhere. And we're going to go here first. Keep these really loose. And if we do opposite diagonals, it'll start to hold itself together here. It's also the other fun part, and that I probably should have looked at some pictures. I'm sure I could have found some as to which way to orient my motor wires. I think I'm going to want them coming out this way, but you know, we may change our mind once we get it going. So now that we've got all 4 bolts, I'm going to start tightening the 2 closest to the motor first, and then get these guys. And then you can see now we've got this X-brace. It's now holding these two bearing blocks together. Our motor spins freely between them. You just want to make sure there's nothing making a weird sound or binding or anything else in here, but so far so good there. From here, we're actually going to move this piece into the main helicopter. So this is where it's going to start to get fun to capture on camera. So let me grab the helicopter, I'll bring it back over, and we'll go from there. Okay, so now we've got the helicopter accessible. I've got the tail sort of balanced there so it won't roll back. It's not quite sitting on its skids yet until we get some more weight in here. And this motor assembly is essentially going to slide between these two rails here, just like so. So we have a number of, cuts the overhead here, a number of these spacers that we'll use that will go in between the upper and lower frames. In this vicinity down here, one on each side there. That's where the longer bolts will go. And then we've got some bolts going through these aluminum sort of, doublers here that were also part of our servo rails to get the motor. Let me twist this whole piece sideways here. You can see these rails here that link into our servo mounts will also be where the motor goes. So you can see there's some adjustment here. So we're going to get all these screws in here. We're going to get Loctite on them. We're going to leave them all loose. And then we will set our mesh between the pinion and the main gear and go from there. So let's start initially on this camera here, and then we'll go around and I'll make sure you can see what we're doing here. So first thing I'm going to do is just try and get this thing in the ballpark. So I'm going to look through the side of the frame and just sort of get us in the center holes. And I'm going to do the top motor screws first, because that'll just sort of hold the thing in a helpful position. And I like where these motor leads are coming off for now. It feels like it's going to be easy to wrap back around to the ESC, so I'm feeling good about those choices so far. Just running blue Loctite on these, and we're going to go through the doubler into the bearing block close to the motor, again leaving these super loose. Just want to start getting screws in there. Make sure everything lines up. So the good news, at least with the Specter V1, and I'm sure this one will be the same, is that although the gear mesh was important, it was pretty forgiving and pretty easy to set. I don't recall anything about it being fussy. I've certainly had some helicopters in the past where the gear mesh was sort of, one way or the other, too much or too little, and it was really fussy, but Spectre seemed pretty tolerant. So that's nice. So don't stress about it too much is the point here. Alright, again, just not even really snugging them up. As soon as I feel it snug, I back it off a tiny bit of a turn. Well, those 4 screws sure went in easy, so that's nice. See if we get us looking in the bottom. Alright, so those are still loose. We've got these longer screws here now that are going to go through. So essentially what's going to happen here, we're going to go, screw goes in through the outer frame, rolls through the spacer, and then comes through the upper frame and then into that lower bearing block of the motor. So once this whole thing's tightened, it's super rigid and strong. So we really only need Loctite on the tip of these, because it's really only the part that hits that lower bearing block we care about. This part is a little fussy. We try and get through the spacer and then into the, wow, feeling, just going to put a tiny bit of friction there so that piece stays upright until I'm ready for it. Oh, just barely fits past the main gear there. Might want to start with the bolt closest to the main gear on the other side. Alright, that went through. If you're like me, I start to feel a little suspicious when things are too easy. I'm like, wait a minute, why are all these bolts going on the first try? One day I'll actually just give the kit credit for being a good kit where things align well, but whenever it goes too well, I get weird. So I'm going to take the spacer. I'm going to start in the end closest to the main shaft, because you have to kind of if you do the screw closest to the front of the helicopter first, it gets a little fussy to... See, here we go. Now this one's fighting me, so I feel better. Or at least for a hot second it was fighting me. Yep, that one's biting as well. So I'll just take this last motor mount screw here. Okay, now we have all 8 screws loosey-goosey. Still hard to move the motor back and forth, so I'm going to go even looser on these. Now it's really starting to look like a helicopter. We got a motor in this thing. Yeah, these are super loose now. See if they'll be alright. So now we got some slide. Okay, awesome. Okay, regular old office printer paper. We're going to just cut it into about an inch tall strip. Then I'm going to cut this in half. This is all you need. It's about an inch by maybe 6 inches. Not even. 4.5 inches, something like that. Now, what I'm going to do is slip this between the main gear and the pinion. Perfect. So it's just sitting across the frames, and I'm going to spin this in a way that you can see where the paper is. So the paper is right in here between our pinion and main gear. So I'm going to slide it in there. I'm going to set the helicopter back upright for a minute while I get this right. And then to set the mesh, I'm going to push the motor tightly in, and I'm going to work it back and forth a little bit here. Is how I do this. And then leave that paper in here, push it in nice and tight, and then I'm going to go ahead and start tightening down just the 2 opposing top bolts here first. That's running through nicely, so now I'm going to do the other top bolts. And then take a look here, that still looks good. Tighten our bottom bolts. Again, working one opposite the other. Okay, 2 more bolts to tighten, and then we're going to try this again with a fresh piece of paper. Okay, so I'm going to feed this piece of paper out. Okay, so now we've got a clean strip of paper here. I'm going to feed it in. And we're just going to spin it continuously until it comes out the other side. And what we want is, we want to see this corrugation with no tearing. So this is perfect. This little tear here is from when I didn't quite have it parallel in there, but we've got corrugation in here, and it's good. Alright, with that, we have ourselves a motor, and it's looking pretty good, if I do say so myself. So we've got our motor in now, well mounted. We've got our gear mesh set, and that looks great. Our tail belt is riding at just the right height. All of this is looking really good. So all that's left at this point is to get our ESC run. So I'm going to tuck this behind me and get all those pieces out. Wait a minute. It's not quite ESC tray time yet. Let's put this away. There's 2 more bolts. So on the underside of the helicopter, in this position right here, so this is the lower motor bearing block, and these 2 slots right here, these 2 little button head screws go in there. So let's go ahead and get this resting. We've got these 2 little button head screws to get in here. So I'm gonna get on the driver here, get just a little bit of blue, and these go into that lower bearing block. So that thing is really just going nowhere. It is held from the sides, from the bottom. It ain't going anywhere. Okay, now you can see there's the 2 we just put in right there. Now that this is done, now we can set this aside. There we go, and get our ESC tray put together. All right, it's time for the last part of the build, really. We're going to get our ESC and FBL installed. Pretty simple. Let's take a quick look at the manual. You can see in the upper left-hand corner here, we're just going to put a couple of screws into these metal rails to go on both sides, and then we will assemble these longer bolts in here. These become sort of canopy posts that just help stabilize the sides of the canopy, and then a couple of bolts through the lower frames on the front end. Super simple. So with that, we're going to take this shorter metal rail here, goes under the front of the ESC. The carbon fiber ESC plate here does have these chamfered recesses in here, you can see. So make sure you get that the right way up so that the screws sit flush with the top of the plate. And it's just this simple. Get everything lined up, get your screws in, and then send them home. I'm going to go ahead and get the rear rail installed the same way as the front, and then we'll come back from there. Okay, so this is all installed. Actually, it's the front rail. I was calling it the rear, but it does have a logo, so make sure this is facing the right way up, because this will be on the front of the helicopter and visible. So with that, let's go ahead and move these parts aside and bring the helicopter over. So the way this will go, let's get these servo wires out of the way, is pretty straightforward. It's just going to fit between the front upper frames here where the motor's mounted, and it's a bit of a tight fit, it seems. There we go. That's in, and then the other end is just going to go between these two ends here. So the side closest to the motor gets these long button head bolts, and these plastic spacers go on them. So put it through the spacer first, and then just get Loctite on the bit sticking out, because that's really all that's going to bite into anything. And then that's going to go through your side frame here into that metal plate we just installed in the ESC tray. And getting this to line up is going to be a little fussy. Move the helicopter down this way to help see where the hole is there. I think I about got it there. And I'm just going to snug that up. Don't go crazy tightening that. And then we'll do the other side the same way. Oops. Carefully land that down here. So we've got our spacer, bolt goes through it, Loctite just the tip, through the upper frame, into that metal rail that's in the back of the ESC tray. Great. And then you can see now we've got these two spacers on here. There are these two little rubber caps that will slide on the end, and your canopy will rest against these. And they just hold the canopy out, make sure it doesn't come in contact with the main gear, etc. And then on the front end, now it should be noted, if you want, you can leave these bolts out, and then what you can do is lift this up. Your FBL is actually going to mount in this area here, along with maybe a capacitor backup you could put up here. There's all kinds of stuff you could fit here if you want to. So obviously I have tons of access if I leave those bolts out, and then when you're done, you just close this down, put these two bolts in. I'm going to go ahead and just put those bolts in now anyway, and then I know where they are and I can find them later. No big deal, it's just blue Loctite, comes out easy. And then, plus I can sort of see how this thing will look. There's so much space in here. Honestly, you could probably install everything with all the screws in place. Tons of room. A little careful thinking, this helicopter should be pretty easy to wire up. There's just lots of space, as I was saying, but there's not any sort of slick cable channel or anything like you might see on some other kits, but I have seen some pretty creative folks 3D print some for the V1. I assume somebody's done it for the V2 at this point, but nothing from XL Power as of yet. Alright. And with this, we've got a finished helicopter. Sort of. So, we've got our motor installed, we've got our ESC tray up here, our FBL will go in here. I think I'm probably going to fit the capacitor backup in this neighborhood as well. We've got our boom and tail push rod installed. Really, all that's left is wiring. Now, I know you're saying it's not a finished helicopter because you haven't put the head on. So, here's what I like to do.
Okay, I'm going to cut myself off here and give you the short version. Essentially, the next step in this process is to go ahead and get all the wiring finished, and then we'll level the swash plate, and then we'll install the main rotor head. I filmed a whole tour of the wiring once the helicopter was completed, and I'm going to show that to you in just a second, and then we'll come back after that, finish building the head, and you'll have a helicopter ready to maiden. Alright, so we've got the wiring done on the V2 now, so I just want to take a moment to give you a quick tour. We're going to work kind of from the back to the front. So, looking here at our cyclic and tail servo, in this case on this side, what you can see is that I've loomed in this wire loom here, the two servo leads into one loom, and then it comes down the body of the helicopter, and it's carefully zip tied. There's plenty of holes and ways to zip tie it, and then it comes around underneath to where the FBL is under the ESC. If we go around to the other side here, sweep the camera around, you can see here that I've done the same thing. So I've got my two cyclic servos here, and then here's the wire loom coming over, down the frame here, under the motor, being careful not to touch the motor or the main gear, and then back under to where the FBL is. Now, bringing all this around, there's a sneaky hidden part here. Let me see if I can get you a good shot of this. But I have in here, underneath, an Xguard RC capacitor backup, and I can stick my finger in and hit the button on it to turn it off. Let me see if I get you a side shot of it, if you can see it kind of mounted in there. You can see the cells of it kind of tucked up under here. A little bit hard to see, but the Xguard is underneath there, and there's still enough room a little further back. You can see the Vbar Neo FBL in there. And then there's just a little bit of extra wire. So let's talk about the wire. With the front mounted FBL, it's a little bit of extra wire to deal with, because obviously some things are closer, like the ESC wire, for example. So what I did is I bundled that up and I fed it back and forth, and then I put that bundle into heat shrink and heat shrunk the bundle and then zip tied it. And then I also have a small section of straw here that contains the antenna on this side from the FBL, or from your receiver if you have one. And then on this side of the frame, you can see here, I have that similar straw set up here with the end of the antenna sticking out there. So they're in slightly different locations on each side of the frame. Certainly didn't have any trouble with reception at all with this layout. My servo wires, as you can see in here, I managed to time it so I didn't have a lot of extra in here. So the FBL wires, mostly all in that zip-tied bundle, and just a few of them come around to the FBL. Same for telemetry, you may be able to see in there. In terms of motor wiring, let's take a look at that. So the motor wires come down under the canopy post here, and then around, and then they double around to the front of the ESC right here. So a pretty straightforward path there. Nice and neat and out of the way. So not a terribly difficult helicopter wire. There's no helpful wiring channels or anything like that to give you a hand, but still plenty of places to zip tie cables. The only thing to keep in mind is just watch out for the main gear, the tail pulley, and the spinning parts of the motor. Make sure you have everything securely zip tied around those parts, and do be mindful to sand the frame. I did sand the ESC tray, as well as put some soft Velcro in the front and some areas here where the ESC wires are going over the edge, just to make sure there's not going to be any chafing or issues there. All right, with that, let's finish up the build.
We built the rotor head about 1 million episodes ago, feels like a long time ago. But we're going to go ahead and bolt it to the main shaft. You'll note that the manual has you bolt it to the main shaft very early on. Again, because of the swash leveler I had, I decided not to do it until the final point here. It's just easier to get the swash leveler on or off, and then I also just don't have the head in the way as we're doing all of the wiring and other setup. So with that, we're going to go ahead and bolt this on. You'll notice the Jesus bolt is going to go through the one hole here, and there's a recess on one side for the head of the bolt, and then another one that's octagonal here that's obviously where the nut will go, so that it's captured and doesn't rotate when you're trying to tighten it. So this we're going, you'll notice the main shaft has 2 holes in it. The Jesus bolt is going to go through the top hole. I'm guessing this bottom hole, this main shaft is shared between the Specter V2 and also the Wraith, so I'm guessing that lower hole perhaps is for the Wraith. But with that, I've gone ahead and cleaned this bolt a long time ago. It does use a nylon lock nut, so we're not going to use any Loctite here because, again, that's a plastic insert in the nut. We don't want to mess with that, so we're just going to sight through the main shaft here and then slide our Jesus bolt through that hole. And now we can relax a lot because that's not going anywhere. And then we'll get our nut in here. And all we have to do is get that started. And then it's just a matter of just going to rotate this where I get my finger on it. There we go. Grabbing a driver. I'm basically just going to push the nut in so it's captured in that little recess. And then I can tighten this bolt without issue. Definitely don't want to mess around here. Gives that a good amount of force. And then our radius arms, which are on here. Let me get a good view here. Sorry, they're getting stuck on everything. So these are our radius arms here. This bolt right here we left loose. We did put Loctite on it. If you didn't put Loctite on it earlier, make sure you put some on it now. So I'm just going to break that Loctite and then go ahead and tighten these bolts down. And again, these just pinch the main shaft. Make sure you have free movement of the radius arm there. Gonna give it a little bit of a go. Still moving nicely. Spin it around. Again, when they're flopping around, they get stuck on everything. So we'll tighten this other one here. And then we should be good to go. Great, we've got free movement of our radius arms. And then now it's just a matter of connecting our main links and our radius arms and going from there. So I'm going to get these radius arms on first, just so I can rotate this thing around without them catching on every last little thing. These are the Lynx ball grip pliers, by the way, available at Helidirect. And they are lifesavers for all kinds of stuff like this. In saving your fingertips and making these tasks just easy. And also damage-free. You know, if you use pliers and fingers and pressure to sort of get these things to snap on, then it's very easy to use too much. Alright, so now that's freely moving around. That's great. And then we're just going to go ahead and get our main links on here. Again, make sure the main link is going the correct direction. There's that little bit of flashing on it. And then what I'm going to remember here is I have to rotate the top link 90 degrees to the bottom. Right now they're sort of flat, as you can see here. So I have to rotate one of them 90 degrees in order to make this work. So if I come around here, I'm going to put the lower half of this on. I know it's a little tricky to see here, but we're going to put the lower half on first. And then I'm going to take the top half, and I'm going to grab some pliers just to hold the link, because, and I'm going to spin this, because I don't want it to rotate as I spin the ball link here. And I'm just going to rotate that 90 degrees so that it aligns well with the blade grip arm. And then we'll go ahead and pop that guy on. Make sure these are moving nicely. And then let's come around and do this side. Pretty easy stuff here. And now it's really starting to look like a helicopter. There's that one. Again, I'm going to go same direction here. Holding our... And we go the same direction because we want these to stay exactly the same length as much as possible. We are going to tweak that a little bit when we check our pitch here in a second, but you never know, you might get perfectly lucky. Okay, so with our main head on here now, everything's working nicely, it's all moving around well. It's now time to build out our battery tray. So I did go ahead and install the battery puller on this. It's just 2 bolts here through little chamfered slots here, pretty straightforward. Make sure you put a little bit of Loctite on there. One last reminder as well, to make sure if you're jumping to the last episode, that you unscrew this piece and put Loctite on it, because it doesn't tell you to in the manual, and if you don't, this piece will unscrew itself and go shooting through your blades. I've got the nick in my Specter V1 blades to prove it, because I didn't know it then, and it came out in play. And goes ding and makes a great sound. Anyway, so with that, I think the thing that makes the most sense now is to go ahead and temporarily mount our batteries on the battery tray. Okay, so I've got a couple of 6S 5000 milliamp packs here that I'm going to start with and build my tray out with. Now, there's a few different ways you can make a 12S pack, and if you're a hard smack, high amp draw, balls out power 3D guy, then instead of using a battery extension like I'm going to use, you would probably want to make this a soldered connection that you're extending. The same is true for your balance leads, but because I run at lower amperages, because I'm more into lower head speed, and I also run so lower amperages, lower head speeds, so I'm not pulling as much current through these connections as, say, somebody, I'm pulling, 80 to 100 amps versus somebody pulling, 200 with spikes to 250, 300. That's a different approach and requires some, different, smartness. Not smartness. It requires making better choices when you're going through. But using a battery extension for my purposes at the current draws I'm using is completely fine. It's more than rated for the task. In this case, these are Spectrum Smart batteries. I'm slowly switching my whole fleet over to Pulse batteries. Since joining Helidirect, I've been super happy with them. But for now, I like to preserve the smart functionality in these packs. So I'm going to go ahead and run extensions so that I get to take advantage of that as well. So what I do is I run an extension on both the balance lead as well as the current lead. So my rear pack has got an extension for both of these, and I'm going to grab some electrical tape and tape over these connections because eventually they're going to get heat shrunk and covered up. So again, any connections that you have in here, I'm going to go ahead and tape over. If any of this is not appealing to you, or you don't care for this approach, Pulse and many other manufacturers make 12S battery packs, in which case you just need to jump the two packs together with a connection in the front that's using a connector and type that makes sense for you, so you don't get it wrong, and your two balance leads will come out the front of the pack. Basically, they do this part of the process for you, only it's with a soldered connection. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run these connections on the side of the tray, and I'm going to run these packs here, and I think they're going to go about, I'm going to go as rearward as I can, because I'm guessing that's what's going to work for the CG, because I have a lot of stuff up front. When I added the capacitor backup and the FBL and the ESC, all that stuff's pretty forward. So I think kind of middle of the tray, leaning towards the front is probably the way to go, and I'm going to run each lead on each side of the battery pack here, and that should easily fit within the width of the tray, yeah, without any trouble there. So, and then that gets my two leads and two balance leads up front. So next step is to get a little bit of Velcro on the tray, but I'm not going to do that just yet because I am going to turn this into a 12S pack with some heat shrink. So for now, I'm just going to get our Velcro straps loaded into our battery tray. Alright, so for now your battery tray should look something like this. This is the top side. I've got my 4 straps. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip that over. And then I'm going to run a bead of Velcro down the top of the tray. And I'll end up adding the other side of this to my battery pack. And that'll just help hold everything in place. But for now, let's start with our front pack. Take a guess as to where we think that'll go. I'm going to say about there. Again, we're going to check the CFG, and that will determine it for good. And then we'll get this pack in there. We're going to have to go further back. Let's start right here. I'm going to pull this down such that the buckle is on the side of the battery, not on top of it. That's how I like to do it. Alright, so now I'm going to slide this guy back to right there. And we're going to capture the balance lead and the power lead inside these Velcro straps now. Alright, so now we've got a 12S pack. Not going anywhere here. You can see roughly the spacing that we're starting with. And we can slide this sucker inside the helicopter and power it up. Alright, so with our battery pack built up, let's go ahead and slide it into the helicopter here. Again, I'll clean all this up with the heat shrink in a little bit, so for now, I'm just going to have to kind of guide these connectors through as we slide it in. And we're going to make sure it latches, and it has. Okay, so with that now we can go ahead and at this point I'm just going to check throttle cut one more time. The safest thing to do here as well is to go ahead and disconnect at least 2 of your motor connections, and that ensures that at no point this motor can energize itself. And then just for triple set keepings and just good habits, make sure that throttle cut is on. In the case of the V-Control Touch, I actually have 2 safety switches. I have a motor safety switch that has to be on in order for the blades to spin, and then another motor on, auto rotation, motor off switch as well. So I've got 2 kill switches, one of which has to be disarmed for the other one to even work. So feel pretty safe here. So we can go ahead and power this up. And this is the first time we can kind of check the length of our battery connections. I think this is going to work out well. And a little bit longer on this one, so we're good there. And there we go. And there we go. So with that, we've got everything working. So let's just check our control positions. So I'm going to set us up at 0 pitch here. You can see our swash is looking pretty level, so they're going to go. So this is the front of the helicopter here, because it's a little hard to see in the camera here. So let's go forwards. So the swash is leading down towards the nose. That's forwards. Backwards, our pin on the back here, our anti-rotation pin drops in the guide, so that's good. We're going to go left. It should drop on the left side of the helicopter, and it does. We're going to go right. It drops on the right-hand side of the helicopter. And then positive, the swash plate goes up. Negative, it goes down. So we are great, in good position there. We'll check the tail a little bit later on. So now that we know that all of this works, and that our throttle is not working, and the head is safely parked, we know we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug one of these battery connectors and hit my capacitor to disengage the helicopter here. And it's disconnected from the radio, so I know it's safe. And I'm going to go ahead and bolt some blades on. So I'll be right back after we got some blades on this thing. So before I go ahead and bolt the blades on, I just want to say a quick comment. So let's support the companies that support us. I won these set of blades at a fun fly, so going to give them a place of honor in this build video as well as on this helicopter. These are the Azure 715 blades. I've heard great things about them, and I'm going to run Azure 115 millimeter tail blades. You could run 105s on this heli, but with lower head speed and longer main blades, I feel like 115s are where I'm going to start. I do have a set of Azure 105s to try as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get these bolted on. They should look great on this heli. So just quick highlight here, one of the cool features of the Specter V2 is it has this sort of new style of blade washer that come in a couple of thicknesses, and it essentially incorporates the little nub here that you can just drop into the hole in the blade grip, and it's a pretty tight friction fit, so you just kind of work it for a minute here with your fingers, and then it pops in, and then it's tight enough actually that friction will hold it in by itself. So once you figure out the right side here, you just take your blade and slide it right in, and then just get that lined up. So instead of all that craziness in the past of fighting with things to get this bolt in, it's actually pretty straightforward, and it all holds together. So when you're positioning the blade perfectly to get that bolt through, it's no stress. And there you go, just drops right in. So super easy. And then you just take the nut. Same thing, the bottom of the blade grip here has a little recess meant to grab the nut so it won't spin, so you just get that in there and do make sure it does drop in there, and then go ahead and tighten your blade. I always check the tightness. I don't go super tight, but I want them to be equal amounts of drag. And as I set up pitch, a little extra doesn't hurt. This side feels pretty good. I just want a tiny bit more on this side. There we go. And that is our main blades on. All right, let's go ahead and get our radio out of the way here and get our tail blades bolted on here. And keep in mind, let's see, you watch, I bet you I'm going to bolt these on backwards because I'm showing this to the camera and I'm used to doing this when I can see it. But I know this needs to rotate. When this rotates clockwise, this rotates counterclockwise, which means the leading edge and the logo of the blade needs to go out. So it's going to go like that. And let me just sight through here, get that lined up. And then in the case of the tail blades, which is a little surprising, there's no recess to capture the lock nut. So we're actually going to have to do that on our own. So this one's going to go this way. So we'll just use a driver on the nut there. Take our driver and the back side, I just have a little nut driver here to hold the nut while I tighten the bolt. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll just check tightness. I run the tail blades a little bit looser, but I want to have a little bit of friction so that when I do an auto rotation and I put the tail in the grass, because I'm still learning, there's a little bit of resistance to it coming all the way back here and nicking itself on the blade. So I'm going to run it a little tighter than that. Check this. That feels good. That feels good. Okay. Now, this thing's starting to look like a helicopter. We got mains and tails on it. We're going to go ahead and get the helicopter repositioned as best we can, and then we're going to grab our pitch gauge, and then we're going to boot it up and check zero pitch and get that set. All right, let's go from there. All right, so now we've got the helicopter in front of us, and we've got my digital pitch gauge here. This is one of the RC logger units. These are sadly quite difficult to find these days. You might find them on eBay or in the for sale sites. I'm not sure if they're still manufactured or not, to be honest with you. But very precise digital pitch gauge. It's also magnetic, so you can pop it off of the blade attachment, which is handy. You'll see in a minute, so that's why I like it. But in any case, you just want a good quality digital pitch gauge for these next steps. So first thing we're going to do is power up the radio. Again, we're making sure that through multiple ways, our rotor head cannot power up. We do not want a situation, and this is why we set up the ESC with no blades off. We check all of our throttle cut and holds and whatnot are working there, because we don't want this to spool up, because obviously there's no place for me to go where I can get out of the rotation of the blade, right? The workbench is right behind me, and should this go to full throttle in a hurry, it'll do a lot of damage. So play it safe. Again, triple checking all of the things. I know I'm good there. I'm going to go ahead and connect my battery lead, and this will boot up. Just going to select which battery pack I have. It's going to yell at me because these aren't charged. They're at storage charge, but plenty of power for what we need to do today. Now I'm going to go into the part of my FBL. In this case, with the Vbar Neo, it's fully integrated with the transmitter. You may have to hook a laptop up to your FBL for this step, or maybe a Bluetooth app on a phone, whatever it is in your helicopter. What we're going to do is go to the portion of our menu where it sets the swash plate to level. So, as you can see here, our swash is dead level. I mean, I've checked it with a swash leveler, but I know it's level here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put a pitch gauge on the blades, and we're going to set them both to 0. So what I do is I pop the pitch gauge off and power it up. And you need to use a reference. So I know that this workbench is very level, so it's a great place to start. So I know that in this direction, front to back this way, that the bench is level. And I know that the top of my motor can is a nice level plane that I would like the blades to be parallel with. Sometimes you can do it across the frame depending on the helicopter, but I often use the top of the motor can. And I put a little bit of downward pressure on it, and it's at 0.9 degrees right now, so pretty dang close. And I'm going to hold down the 0 button here. It's going to beep at me. And I've now set 0. It's now reading 0.00 degrees right here. So now I know that if I pop this guy onto here and stick it on the blade, I can use it to reliably set 0 pitch here. So it's interesting. I was watching a video where Nick Maxwell was talking about where he puts the pitch gauge. You know, a lot of us talk about wanting to do it closer to the root of the blade. closer to the head. He talks about setting it out towards the tips because he feels like that's the where the blade generates the most lift and the spot where you want the tracking to be the most perfect. So seems reasonable to me. So we're going to go ahead and do that because who doesn't want to be like Nick Maxwell? The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get out and I'm going to sight down the helicopter. I want to make sure that my main rotor head is dead parallel with the boom, and then I want to make sure the sort of center line of the blade, basically from where it is on the bolt through to the tip, imagine a straight line, and make sure that's parallel as well. So before we do any pitch, what we want to make sure is that, I'm going to exaggerate this here, one blade isn't like that. We want it to be as dead straight as possible before we set zero pitch. So the only way to do that is to get the head parallel and then sight down the blades and get them feeling pretty good. And you got it right when the rotor head is parallel with the boom, and you can look all the way down, one blade through to the other, right down the center line. And on the Azure is kind of this red line on here is sort of great to sight down with. It's kind of a good indicator. And we're pretty darn close. We're 0.7 degrees right now, so really only fine-tuned adjustments come in here. So this blade here is controlled by this blade grip arm right here. This is what controls the degree of rotation of this blade. So we're going to adjust this drive link here and get it right. So this little guy is this great little tool that has a very narrow purpose, but man, I tell you, I use this thing all the time and love it. So its only purpose is to hold the ball links, top and bottom, in the position they're in while you adjust the turnbuckle without letting these rotate. Because if I just grab a pair of pliers and rotate this in or out, what happens is a lot of time these links just pop right off, or they are not at the angle I want them to be at. So right now, this one is nice and parallel with the ball it's on, and so is this one. But what I want to do is I want to hold this guy in place and this guy in place like that. So now I can put a pair of pliers on the turnbuckle and hold this piece just by hand, and I'm only adjusting the height of this turnbuckle here. So I unfortunately do not have a turnbuckle wrench that size, but I keep in my kit just a small C-wrench for this very purpose. Smarter men than I probably know instinctively which way to turn the turnbuckle to change the degrees of pitch. I don't. I take a look at what the degrees are. I turn it one way. If it goes closer to zero, great. If it goes the other, then if it doesn't, I need to go the other way. So right now we've got negative 0.6 degrees. So we're very close, but we're going to get closer because that's who we are. So we're going to run this in a direction and see what happens. So negative 0.6. We're going to run about a quarter turn that way. Negative 1.0. So now we need to know, we need to go the other way. So we're going to go this way plus a little more. See what that gets us. Back to where we started. So now we're going to keep going this direction. And I'm doing small moves here. Now we're at 0.4. Well, negative 0.1, so just a little nudge here. We're talking small, a tenth of a degree. 0.00. Awesome. So now we've got zero pitch. Now here's one thing I do at this point. I'm going to take this contraption off because obviously it moves this link around a little bit, and then I'm going to triple check that I'm not nudged. See, that got nudged a little. As you mess with things and you tighten things, you sometimes rotate, and then I'm going to look at the again. So now I'm at negative 0.2. So obviously I bumped this thing a little bit, and so we're just going to come around and check it again. And that's why we remove this, double check that we're still parallel, and check it again. So let's see if that gets us there. I'm going to take this off again because again I'm in the home stretch here, still looking parallel. Now we're positive 0.1. So we went just a tiny bit too far. So we're just going to bring it back the other way, just a tiny amount. Not much here, we're splitting hairs. 0.0. Great, right? So we're good to go there. Now what I need to do is very carefully
without disturbing the helicopter, rotate the other blade forward, because I've got this one a zero pitch. I need to set zero pitch on this one. I'm going to use the same pitch gauge. I'm going to not power it off, right, because it's remembering where zero pitch is, our center point that we set with the top can of the motor, and we're going to bring this blade around and set it over here. So let's go ahead and do that now. We've now rotated this around, so we've got the pitch gauge on the other blade. We're going to check for it being parallel. Sight down. The boom again, and it's in that same spot. It's actually negative 0.6 degrees again. So similar adjustment here. These are all good signs, right? The fact that our swash is level, right, means that no matter where we rotate this around, theoretically the pitch should stay the same because it's level. And the fact that we built our two main drive links exactly the same means the fact that they're both started at negative 0.6 is a good sign, right? That our links are the same. So now we just basically need to adjust this side, because this is the blade grip arm that adjusts and controls this blade. I know on the other one we went this direction to head to positive, so I can remember when I've just done it, but not so much when... Alright, so that's a good chunk there. Let's see how we did. Holy cow. Let's see if this still stays true. So I'm going to pop this off. And then sometimes I even just jiggle the link a little bit, recenter it. And then let's see how we did. 0.00. Boom. So, just like that, we've now got 0 degrees of pitch. So theoretically our tracking, which is as the blades rotate quickly, we want the tips to be the exact same. So imagine the helicopter on a dead level playing field. We want the tips to rotate through the exact same space of air. So, you know, blade number 1 rotates through and it's at this height, and blade number 2 rotates right through behind it and it's at the exact same height. We don't want one to be higher or lower than the other. And if these links were different lengths, or we had adjusted zero pitch differently, the tracking would be off, and that's very bad. It causes a lot of vibration, and it's just not good in general for precision flight. So we've got zero pitch in the case of the V-bar. It's now time to do a few more things here while we've got our setup menu open. So I'm going to go into, in the case of the Neo, and I'm not going to get into crazy detail here because again it's different for every FBL, and we're going to go to maximum positive pitch, and I want 12.5 degrees, so I'm in full positive. I'm going to see what the pitch gauge says. It says 13.7, so I'm going to lower my value here until it says 12.5. And again, degrees of pitch is not an absolute, right? It's something you should tune. If the helicopter doesn't respond the way you want it to, then change it, right? If you want more pitch, add it. Don't say, oh, I don't need more pitch. I already have 12.5 degrees. If it feels like you need more, add more. But I'm guilty, I will say, of just going with one value. Alright, so that was positive pitch. Let's go negative pitch. I'm going to set that to the same 12.5 degrees. Wow. I'm getting lucky. It's like half the time that it's perfect out of the gate almost. So we're already at 12.5 on that one, and those two values are fairly close, which is a good sign. So we've got that, and then we're going to do in the V-bar called the Cyclic calibration. Basically, we're going to tell the V-bar where 8 degrees are, and so it knows what my maximum and minimum are, and that I want to call those maximum, but telling it where 8 degrees is kind of helps it out a little bit, as it's doing its FBL thing. So I want to go to 8 degrees, and there it is, 8 degrees. So we've done positive pitch, negative pitch, we've set our neutral pitch, so that is good to go there. So that's it for our pitch setup. One of the other things to check is just make sure that we don't have any physical collisions of the servos, right? So I'm going to run negative pitch, and then I'm going to run the opposite right-hand stick to all of the corners, and I'm going to make sure nothing's hitting or binding. And I'm going to do the same with positive pitch, that's full positive. And I'm running to all the corners, and nothing's binding at all. So no issues there. Okay, great. All right, now let's move on to our tail setup. So we're going to set our tail throw. So let's get where you can see the tail here. Now, we're going to check
the directions of the tail blade. So, in this case, this is a counterclockwise tail. I know it goes counterclockwise, and I know the leading edge of both blades are going the correct directions. That's the first thing to check. That the manual will tell you which way your tail is supposed to rotate. So I've got that. Now I'm going to go left stick on the rudder, and the trailing edge of the rudder should match the direction of my stick when I'm like this. So I'm at the back of the helicopter, and I'm going to go, and I can tell you right now, my tail's backwards, right? So no bueno. So we're going to reverse the servo. So now when I go left here, the trailing edge goes left, and when I go right, the trailing edge goes right. So I'm going to now double check my throw limits here. So this is my left limit, and I want to set it right up until the point the V-bar doesn't bind, the servo doesn't bind. Now with Thetas, I'll tell you, it's really tricky with Thetas because they're so dang quiet. Normally with other servos, you go to the limit and you can hear the servo start to buzz if it's fighting. Like if you've gone too far and it's hitting, you can see the pitch slider here, traveling. And if it were to hit the physical limit, where it can't travel anymore, then it would buzz and whatnot. But with Thetas, you can't really hear that, even if you really crank it up. Like I just hear it grumpy. I hear like a little click. So, take that down 1 point, just to give it a little safety, and then I'm going to go the other way. And here you got that little rubber gasket when it's going in towards the tail case. I'm trying to get out of the way here. But essentially I'm going to have it sort of just kiss that rubber gasket without pushing against it. And in the V-bar, I want to make sure those two values are pretty similar, within a narrow range of each other. But we're good. So now let's just double check our throws again. Left, right, left, right, left, right. Okay, so now we're going to check the gyro correction of the tail. And this is very important because if you get this wrong, as soon as you spool up the helicopter and the torque kicks in and the tail tries to correct for it, it's actually going to make it worse, and it's just going to peer like crazy, and you better be really fast on throttle hold or you're in for a world of hurt. So now we're going to check the gyro correction of the tail. As I move the tail towards me, the trailing edge of the top blade should come towards me. So let's see if that does in fact happen. And it does. Let me hold this blade here so you can see. So if I go away from me, the trailing edge goes away. If I come towards me, it points towards me. So away, away, towards me, towards me. I don't know how easy that is for you to see, but you can see when I go away real fast, it goes away. All right, so our tail direction is correct. Our tail correction is right. Now let's check the correction of our main tail rotor. Okay, so we've got our helicopter level at this point. We're going to lean it forward, and the swash plate should try and stay level. So when I lean this forward, this anti-rotation pin should go down, and it does, right? So see the swash trying to stay level there. So I lean the helicopter forward, and the swash leans backward, trying to counter that action. The same should happen in the opposite direction. I lean this backwards, whoops, so whack the tail, the pin should go up. So let's go backwards, pin goes up. Let's try it in this direction. The same thing should hold true side to side. So as I rotate it to the right, the side closest to me should drop, right? So the swash tries to stay level. So if I go this way, it stays level that way. So it counters my rotation. So all of our correction directions are working. So you want to check forwards, backwards, side to side, and then your tail direction as well. So we've got our left, right direction throws, our forward, backward direction throws, our tail left and right, and then our correction left and right, our correction forward, back, and our correction left, right, and then we're good to go. So with that, this helicopter is ready to maiden, except we haven't set the center of gravity. So to properly do that, we need to get everything we're going to put on the helicopter to flight on it, including the canopy. So I've got that here. Now, this is one of the things where I've made a couple of upgrades. I've got the magnet mounts. These are actually from the original Specter V1, but they're still available. And I have the locks fasteners, which is like a quick disconnect with the Kenny Hutton. These aren't XL Power. This is made by one of the guys from Team A Main. And it means I can very quickly
slide my canopy on. You can hear the front magnets connect, and I just pop these fasteners here. And this one, I've just got to get it to latch. There it goes. And then we're good to go. All right, so now we've got our canopy on, we've got our blades on, we want to check center of gravity. So I'm going to stand back here for that. So the way we check the center of gravity is we're going to grab the main rotor, like so, and with everything in it, batteries and everything, and we're going to set the helicopter like this. Got the blade kind of balanced against my leg, and we're going to see what happens. Which way does it go? So in one direction, and I think it's probably that direction, there's a lot of friction. And so it's really going to hold against the drivetrain. So you set it this way, and then let go. So our tail's going down. So our batteries very clearly need to slide forward. So take 4 CG. And we just make sure our magnets are engaged. Okay. All right, here we go. Take 4. CFG. Flip it this way. Higher. That's the money. Check it the other direction, just for giggles. There it is. So there. There. Alright, so now I can mark my battery pack, and I'm going to go ahead and get that heat shrink, and then we'll get this all cleaned up. So, just real briefly, why do we get the center of gravity? Why does that need to be perfect? Why was that worth going through 15 minutes of moving the batteries back and forth? You know, your flybarless unit is there to keep the helicopter doing the last thing you told it to do, right? So if you're telling it to do fast forward flight, nice and level, it's doing that, and it's, you know, dealing with other factors, wind, you know, any number of things in the air, and the less it has to counteract the weight or the mass of the helicopter itself, you know, the better it's going to fly, right? So the flybarless unit, you know, if it's trying to keep your helicopter in forward flight, it's not dealing with the fact that it's also tail heavy, right? So you're trying to go forward flight, and you're dealing with the wind and everything else going on, and you also have this heavy tail trying to pull the helicopter. So now it's having to add extra inputs to counter that. So the more we get things, you know, balanced around the main shaft, the more the FBL doesn't have to work as hard to keep the helicopter doing what it's supposed to be doing, but also the more precise your maneuvers are going to look, right? You're not fighting that constant, you know, extra rotation from the helicopter. Everything is, you know, balanced right around the main shaft. So that's why we do that. Now, you will hear other people telling you to, you know, lift your helicopter and balance it this way. That doesn't actually tell you anything, so don't do it that way. Do it the way I showed you is the most accurate way to go ahead and get it balanced. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get some heat shrink. I can get this battery pack detailed out, and then we'll come back from there. Okay, so we got our 12S stick pack ready to go. Now, it's interesting, I ordered an additional one, and I don't know if there's different part numbers, but the main thing that seems to be different is this tray here seems to be designed only to load from the rear because it has this additional little nub here that stops it from being able to slide more forward, whereas this style tray does not have that. And it's got a slightly smaller ring. I don't know if this is a V1 tray I ordered from by mistake, certainly possible, but I really like the fact, and I'm going to figure out which tray this was, that it can be loaded from the front as well, because for the way my battery packs are, it's much more convenient to line it up that way, even though it doesn't have the alignment guides, and just latch it in that way, and it's not going anywhere. That pin is, you know, securely in here as well. So with that, let's get the canopy on this thing and see what it looks like. All right, and with that, we have our completed Specter V2 with our Azure 715s and 115 tails. It's good to go, right? We've done our pitch setup. We've got our corrections checked. We've got our ESC set up and programmed, ready to go. With the Hobbywing, I just need to do the initial spool up at 50%. So I gotta remember to do that. Again, in these moments where there's something I think, hey, I gotta remember to do that, I'm gonna take out my phone as soon as I shut the camera off here and write a quick list of all the things I need to remember to do on the first flight. But great build, really enjoyed putting this one together. Very typical XL Power build and manual experience. Again, it's different to some other manufacturers on the market that may have more
slightly more detailed manuals, but if you have a helicopter or two under your belt, or this build video to watch alongside, you certainly will be able to get through it. Fit and finish looks fantastic. I've got the custom Egodrift canopy on mine. The stock red and white canopy looks awesome as well. Alright, with that, I'm Nick Wisdom. Thanks for watching this Specter 700 V2 build series video. It's been a pleasure building along with you. There'll be one more quick video in the series, which will just be our pre-flight checks at the field, and the maiden, which hopefully goes really well. But that should come in a couple of weeks or so. So with that, once again, thanks again. Nick Wisdom, Hack TV, out.